Welcome to this episode of CEO Perspectives, a signature series by the Conference Board. CEO Perspectives are conversations that take an objective, nonpartisan look at a range of subjects that matter most to business leaders. I'm Steve Odland, the CEO of the Conference Board and the host of this series, and in today's conversation we're going to discuss the state of affairs in the Gulf. How has this region changed, especially in the face of world events, and how can we expect the region's geopolitics to shift in the future?
You are listening to CEO Perspectives, a podcast by the Conference Board.
Joining me today is Hisham Al Razzuqi, the former CEO of the Gulf Investment Corporation and a Global Counsellor for the Middle East here at the Conference Board. Hisham, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, and I'm pleased to participate with you in this podcast.
So, Hisham, you have incredible global experience over your lifetime. Please tell us a little bit about it.
Well, if I would start with my educational background, because I think this what probably has shaped me a little bit. My father was, a believer in that his children should have really the best education. So I come from Kuwait and born in Kuwait, but since I'm young, we went to a boarding school in Alexandria in Egypt for several years, for 6 years, and then moved later on to Jerusalem, and then you have the 1967 war, and we have to go to Amman, and I finished my high school from Amman, Jordan, and then finished my university degree at the American University of Beirut. So this is, and I finished my university in 1973. Immediately after that, I worked at the Ministry of Planning. At that time, it was called the Planning Board. And that was an excellent experience for a period of about 1 year because it involved, an agreement with what is called the EIU, Economies Intelligence Unit. And they were doing like a McKinsey report on the joint ventures in Kuwait, and this is the experience with the government of Kuwait with the private sector. So we were evaluating at least 15 companies of this type of, and that gave me a good insight from an investment banking point on how to restructure companies, how to improve their operational side. After that, I was one of the companies I did work on was what was called KFTCIC, Kuwait Foreign Trading Contracting and Investment Company, and that was the largest investment company in that time in Kuwait, which was a publicly traded company owned at least by 90% by the government of Kuwait. And so I joined as a junior and progressed, but I was moving very quickly into the hierarchy, and I reached the last position I reached was as a deputy general manager, the second person in the organization. But that period was very important because we started in 1973, and it was at the time when 74. Sorry, that was at the time when oil prices started going up after the oil embargo, and so wealth was created during this period for the Gulf countries, and also the capital market was reshaping, and Kuwait was a much more advanced country at that time, and I played personally a role in that period, and I do remember that I did the first ever KD bond issue for a foreign borrower, which was called the OKB, Österreichische Control Bank, which is the export bank of Austria, which was a quality borrower denominated in Kuwaiti dinar. And subsequently, I did also the first ever Kuwaiti dinar bond issue for a local borrower for the Industrial Bank of Kuwait. And the advantage of that, we tried to create a secondary market issue to create awareness in the market. So we made an agreement, if I recall, with the Central Bank of Kuwait to consider those bonds as part of the liquid assets of the Central Bank. And that made it at any bondholder who wants to get rid of his or sell his bonds, then most of the banks will be able to will pick them up because they have a higher yield. Of course, I was in charge of, during that period, when I reached the position I reached, I was in charge of what is called the treasury, the credit, as well as the capital markets, what is called marketable securities. Subsequently, later on, I joined Gulf Investment Corporation, which was also a turning point in my career. I joined the company from its first day of its inception in 1st of May in 1984. And as you know, the Gulf Investment Corporation is owned by the governments of the 6 GCC countries. It is the first institution to be established after that, with the aim of diversifying, the economies of the Gulf. And to give it importance, the board of directors were the ministers of finance and the governors, or some of them are the governors of the central bank. So it was really a very important organization. And during the period I was involved in, I became, the last 12 years of my career, I stayed about 27 years in that organization. The last 12 years, I was the CEO. It transformed the company into an entrepreneurial company, a company that we created and participated in at least about 70 projects and diversified in different areas of industries, from powers to petrochemical to communications and so on. And we were very innovative in the way we're running it like a private sector, although this has been government owned, and the returns has substantially improved. During the period I was involved in, we have achieved an IRR for the 12 years of at least 14.5%. And to give you an idea of the value added of diversification, which is important, the idea of investing in such projects. For example, we had a portfolio in our of $2.4 billion of projects of about 40 companies at the time when I left. The total value of those projects were about $30 billion, and it created jobs for about 30,000 people, and that was really, and achieved a higher returns of at least 14.5. For a company of this nature, it was really, of course, the company was also the organization, which I'm proud to be very much associated and very much involved in, is also active in the capital markets and the advisory businesses. So this is basically the background of where I do come from.
Yeah, so you've had an incredible career in Kuwait and in the Gulf and in banking and the capital markets. So you've been able to see the development of the Gulf from your perch over the past, many decades. How have you seen things change in the Gulf over the past 70 years?
Well, I wouldn't say 70 years. I have seen it in the last 50 years, for example, from the 70s. When oil prices, actually in the 70s, the oil prices were about $3 in the early 70s. And then moved up to higher. So that created, major wealth for the Gulf countries in general. So yes, there has been a major, tremendous change that has taken place in the Gulf. The Gulf constitute, they produce they are now a key source of fossil fuel, providing at least 1/5 of the global oil and gas supply, and around half of the proven reserves. So that wealth that has been generated has been put in good use. The countries of the Gulf built roads, infrastructures, communications, hospitals, schools. And not only that, they have provided a welfare system for their nations. So they have provided free education to its citizens. The scholarships goes to international universities in the US, in Europe, or in other parts in the Arab world. Provided a free health system, which is very important also at the same time. Provided a secure job. They give you also, in some countries within the Gulf, give you almost free housing. A job that is almost secured when you are ready and after university or after school. So it was really a proper welfare society. Not only that, also for the lower income people, and not for everybody. Subsidized food was provided, electricity was subsidized, gas fuel was subsidized. So they have created that welfare system, which is extremely important. So, and that was really the advantage. The Gulf has benefited from this wealth generated from oil. At the same time, the Gulf, what I have seen during this period, witness what is called, a political unity, or what is called the GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council, similar to the EEC, and that really has provided really stability, political and economical stability, and we have seen it reflective during the Gulf War of Kuwait, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, how the Gulf countries stepped in and supported that. And we have seen it when Iran tried to disrupt Bahrain, for example, and Saudi Arabia went in and stepped in, supported Bahrain to make sure that the regime and the country is stable. So, and this is really a very important political entity, the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, of which the institution I worked for was really used to work for was the ones that have developed it.
Yeah. So it's incredible wealth provided by natural resources, which and you've got half of the world's supply still there. So seemingly not endless, but for a very long time. At the same time, you've got this GCC providing coordination and some peace in the region. So, but that does create some risk, because there's such a huge reliance on oil in the region. How sustainable is that? And talk to us about how the Gulf countries are trying to diversify their economies.
Oil is a depleted resource. It has a life. It cannot continue to be produced. And this has been known to the Gulf countries. But unfortunately, with oil prices going up and higher prices, it blurred the vision to many of the Gulf countries not to diversify as much as they should really have needed to diversify. It is only probably some of the countries did, as a matter of fact, diversify, but it's not really, in my opinion, it was not really enough. So those economies have really been controlled by the governments of the GCC. Almost a great control of the economy. The private sector role played a role, but it was not really a major role in that respect. It is only after when the clean energy issues has started to come up, people or governments have started to realize the importance of diversification. And some of the countries have started that at least 5 years ago, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and have started to diversify. As a result, they have started to change their policies to a more friendly, to try to encourage the private sector, for example, to a more friendly environment, so that it's easy to do business. So ease of doing business was really important. Attracting FDI, foreign direct investment, was also very important. Giving more role to the private sector in general. Diversifying, we've seen it very clearly over the last few years that the industries, FDI for example, has gone reasonably high in Saudi Arabia. I think it reached 19 billion. So, similarly, the Emirates is also almost to a similar figure. Diversification was really an important aspect to create basically jobs and to create value-added jobs.
So, but tell us what industries the Gulf countries are looking to develop as a juxtapose against the oil business.
Okay, I think the Gulf countries are trying to diversify their economies into industries that have added value, export-related industries. Teaming up with foreign companies, for example, and bringing technology so that they can develop their industries for as exports. Tourism has been created both in Saudi Arabia, internal tourism in Saudi Arabia to attract locals to go into that. That was almost non-existent, at one time almost. But Dubai and the Emirates, they're very active in that. To some extent, Qatar does that. Giving more of a role to the private sector in general was also important to diversify. So I think these are measures that are of real importance, of creating value-added goods and services that will help the economy.
Now, how has the war in Ukraine affected the Gulf? I mean, clearly Russia was another source of oil in the world, and there was the embargo from the West and so forth. Did it just shift the supply chain around, or did it actually impact the economies there?
Of course, I mean, as you know, the Ukraine worldwide has had its impact in terms of inflation. So inflation pressures moved up. That means higher interest rates to curb inflation. Oil prices shot up as a result of disruption of supply of oil, especially coming from Russia. But the Gulf, in terms of inflation, during the year 2022, did not really suffer very much. It was about only 4%. But it has also benefited the Gulf from higher oil prices that has been generated and that have helped and will help, in the diversification process of our economy. So I think from that aspect, the Gulf luckily has not. It's only some of the food prices have went up, but it was in general not very significant.
Yeah, so it sounds like you've fared better than many in the West.
Yes.
With relatively low inflation and with oil prices rising, that helps people in the Gulf. The other question I had was related to China. The Middle East and the Gulf in particular has been part of the old Silk Road. China has been part of, I guess, the Gulf in some way or another for thousands of years. Talk about China's current impact on the Gulf and also its alliance with Russia and how that impacts the Gulf.
The Gulf have had an independent approach towards its relationship with China, with India, with the East in general. Try to have a balanced also approach between the United States and China. Historically, its relationship was extremely strong with the United States, but but China has become a world, a major partner in trade, in technology, in many areas that are also important. Importing of oil, importing of some of those raw material. So the region has played a very balanced role. And that try not to side with one versus the other.
Yeah, and China's Belt and Road Initiative has been active now for many years. They're on Belt and Road 2. That's impacted a lot of areas of the world, especially Africa. But how has it impacted the Middle East, if at all?
I think it is, as I mentioned, China is an important partner in providing goods and services. Most of the services they have helped in the construction of many of the ports and many of the infrastructures that are in our part of the world. They provide, many of the areas that have been built in that was needed, So they have the manpower, they have the technology, and so we got a good overall usage of that relationship with China.
A partnership then.
Yes.
Yeah. According to the UN, in as recently as 2020, the Gulf accounted for about 20% of the world's seaborne trade. You talked about 20% of the oil, but it's also 20% of the seaboard trade, and then nearby in the Red Sea another 10%. These are huge sea lanes, and they come to choke points at various places. Talk to us about your view of the safety and security of those sea lanes and what's the outlook is.
Security is extremely important.
Yeah.
And as you know, the area where, be it the Gulf area or the Red Sea area, as sea roads are extremely important, for world trade, maintaining reasonable, sustainable, stable oil prices. It cannot really be allowed, to be disrupted. And we have tested that during this has been tested, during the Iraq-Iran war at the time of Reagan, 1987, when there has been an attack on some of the oil tankers, the Kuwaiti oil tankers carrying oil in the Gulf. So Kuwait called on the United States. And the United States, seeing the importance of this situation, put the flags of the United States on those ships, as a matter of fact, and escorted those. So it provided stability, and that area is an extremely important area to be sustained, and I think that will continue to be the case, because this is, and as far as the Red Sea is concerned also, the Red Sea, which connects from the Red Sea also to the Suez Canal. Saudi Arabia is building major ports, economic ports. You have the Jeddah port, King Abdullah port, the Neom area is being built. That will also create more and more traffic and more jobs. So, and Saudi Arabia, with its relationship with Egypt, that will continue be a strong relationship. And that sea road will continue to be important.
So who's providing the security? You have the East African pirates, threatening the Red Sea area, and now we have Iran threatening the.
If you talk about the pirates, that's not really within.
No,
it's a bit off of that particular area. So. But this area is Saudi Arabia is providing will provide security. During the Houthi, the war with Yemen, for example, there were attempts to smuggle arms from through the Red Sea to that. So this is continuously, that sea road is continuously monitored.
Yeah, and it's really important. You live in an interesting neighborhood. Kuwait geographically is a relatively small country, and you're surrounded by these incredibly large countries, including Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Iraq. What's it like living in that neighborhood?
Well, we have, Kuwait, without its relationship with the Gulf, with the GCC, would be extremely vulnerable. We have seen that very clearly during the Saddam invasion of Kuwait in 1990, and we feel safe because we have excellent relationship with not only with our neighbors, the Gulf countries we are part of the GCC, but also we have strong alliances with both the United States, the United Kingdom, that will continue, in my opinion, to provide that comfort and support to us. So we feel safe. Yes, I agree with you. The situation in Iran, the situation in Iraq is not really very comfortable. And unfortunately, it has been disrupted. But I don't foresee, in the near future, that will settle the disruption, especially in Iraq. Iran is try to resume relationship with Saudi Arabia, but still that needs to be tested in general.
Well, geopolitics in the region have been shifting since the beginning of time. I mean, this is the cradle of civilization that we're talking about, and it's been a crossroads. So it's not, and it's been overrun by, over time by virtually everybody. You have to be cognizant, obviously, of what's going on in a different way than others around the world. So last question, this Iran threat is probably the closest threat you've had for a long time, since the Iraq War. How do you view Iran's influence in the region?
Well, Iran has unfortunately played, since the Khomeinis came, a disruptive role in the region. Totally disruptive role. And we could have a stable region, but unfortunately, Iran played, they controlled Iraq.
They control Iraq right now.
Definitely they control Iraq, and the politics within Iraq, and who is there, who is on top there. It is controlled by Iran, for example. They have disrupted Syria, Lebanon, for example. They've disrupted the Houthis. They tried to disrupt Bahrain, tried to engulf the Gulf countries overall, and past the revolutionary thoughts and ideas and ideologies. This cannot really be sustained, and they realize that. So unfortunately, hopefully, if Iran goes back to its senses and you have an acceptable regime that is more rational, we will have a very stable and a very, very, very prosperous region in general.
And if not?
We will continue as we are still, but we could be much more prosperous.
Yeah. Hisham, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for listening in to CEO Perspectives. Every week I'll be joined by a prominent thought leader to provide insights on the issues of our time. We'll cover the leading topics in geopolitics, economics, public policy, and more. I'm Steve Odland, and this series has been brought to you by the Conference Board.
You have been listening to CEO Perspectives, a podcast by the Conference Board.